What if change was fun? What about this is such a radical concept? Like creating a new career from scratch. Yeah. Quitting sugar or quitting alcohol. Woo. Building a healthier habit like meditation or saving money. Opening our hearts to people whose beliefs we may not agree with. We know we may benefit from change, but do any of these sound fun? Aren't each of these kind of terrifying, if not entirely misery-inducing? Does changing ourselves have to be so brutally hard? As a meditation teacher and executive coach, I have a front row seat for personal transformation. It's my favorite part of my job. And what I repeatedly see is that most of us want to change some area of our lives. We are wired for expansion, but not as many of us achieve lasting, positive results. The ones who do, who are successful, shift their relationship to change. And in doing so, become a person capable of achieving completely different results. Research on the success rates of New Year's resolutions is actually more hopeful than you would think. Dr. John Norcross of the University of Scranton is one of the foremost living experts on behavior change. His classic study in the Journal of Clinical Psychology found that 46% of people who made resolutions to change were still successful at the 6-month mark. I told you it was more hopeful, right? It's more hopeful. Compared to 4% who never bothered making a resolution. But what he also found was that having the skills to change was a major predictor of long-term success. Playing change as a game, a 1980s arcade game apparently, is a powerful skill. One that has the potential to shift your entire relationship to changing yourself. Changing ourselves is a messy start-stop process. Discipline and effort are a given. It takes work, but brutally hard, maybe brutally hard is optional. The executives I have the privilege of coaching and working with founders and entrepreneurs, people who are just wired for ridiculously high risk tolerance, those people, I'm sure there's some of those people in this room. Yeah, you people. There's just a completely different relationship to change in play there. They almost have this spirit that just says game on. So let's look at the game from a higher level. I'll simplify it because it's a really simple model. There's only 2 stages of the game. Here's the game. What is? It's a cliff. What could be? What could be faces what is, but you may have sensed there's a little bit of a gap between them. Our ego sees the gap, and it looks like a bottomless chasm of fear and death. What? Between what is and what could be. And what's in there that we see so prevalent in our world today is what the military calls VUCA. V-U-C-A. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So needless to say, when we look down the gap on our way to what could be, understandably, we tense up. We resist the process. And when we resist the process, what happens? If we try to manage change or if we try to do change with more actions, what happens? Change kind of has its way with us a little bit. I don't know if you've had the same fortune cookie recently. I recently ripped this one. I was so psyched about this one. But you could try to change everything, or you could change yourself. My coach, Bob, loves to remind me of that one a lot. But it's our relationship to this environment. The other night, I saw a family friend, Mark Smucker, speak in Akron. Mark Smucker is the 6th CEO of the family business, Smuckers. And he said that in the last 15 years of their business, they've experienced, taken on, and in many ways conquered, but the challenge continues. They've taken on more change than than they have in the entire 121-year history of the company. So the last 15 years compared to 121 years, more change. But he also said that in that just about that same amount of time, Smucker's has grown from a $400 million family operation to an $8 billion portfolio of brands. And I started thinking, what's at stake here and what are the possibilities if we renegotiate this relationship to change? There are 3 games we could play at a day-to-day level that have the shot of reversing polarity on our relationship to change. And what do I mean by reversing polarity? Well, so watching my clients to succeed versus the ones who don't, they have this different relationship. And if you think about 2 horseshoe magnets that face one another, they could just as well be what is and what could be. Horseshoe magnets, north polarity on the top, south polarity on the bottom. You hold them together, what happens? But if you reverse polarity, no gap. It's the clients that reverse polarity by making the process fun versus something we naturally resist that create change that has a shot of sticking for the long term. So there are 3 games we could play to shift our relationship and create change that has a shot of sticking. Do you want to play? Yeah. Okay, that's convincing enough. Do you want to play? Yeah. Okay, all right. The first is swap fun for resistance. Somewhere my daughter's cringing in the audience. It's to remember, fun for resistance. It's actually more fun than it sounds. The second is called Befriend the Ego, which is just as challenging as it sounds. And third is focus more on where you're heading, not what you're leaving behind. Believe it or not, creating a new habit, releasing an old habit that no longer serves us, or even finding a new career and building it from scratch can be a good time. According to a 2017 study by Dale Carnegie Training, 72% of Americans want to leave or change their job. My client Jack was definitely one of these people. Do you know those otherwise radiant people who also happen to be completely deflated by their job? On paper, he was a successful software developer. But this guy had once also backpacked across Spain, solo, on foot. He's a free spirit, a citizen of the world. Now, for whatever reason in his job, he's chained down to project milestones and delivery dates, working isolated from all of his colleagues, working from home, just him and his computer. He doesn't have any interest in his manager's job, so his options feel completely bleak. And what do we do when we're desperate for some or any change? We decide we have to go. So his manager, sensing all the resistance, tightens the screws on Jack, expressing dissatisfaction with his communication style, low motivation. And Jack expands his job search, lowers his standards, gets more detached from his team, loses interest in the work he's doing, and the feedback is that he's moody, not a team player. The manager applies more pressure, which just erodes trust on both sides of the relationship. Anxious, distrustful, full of fear is not the best look for a job search, yet most of us approach it this way. The best thing that would happen was that he would create the same exact circumstances at a new company. The worst thing is that he would get fired and miss out on his stock vesting. The honeymoon phase of any new job would fade quickly and the whole cycle would start again. So we had to get clear with Jack on what he was looking for from his work. Deeper than, cooler boss, more money, we were looking for the essential qualities, the experiences he wanted to have, and the emotions that he was feeling or missing from his work. Autonomy, deeper connection with his colleagues, higher visibility projects, freedom to travel the world again, time to take care of himself, yoga. And by reconnecting with these, he was able to see and remember that what he does is not who he is. It created a healthy detachment from the work without having to leave. So instead of updating his resume and sneaking out for interviews, what we typically do, he commits to regular meditation, yoga, and running. His free spirit vibe starts coming back, so he picks back up his dream outside of work of building tiny homes. Finishes his second tiny home, starts renting it out, And all this momentum is picking up because he's not actively resisting his job any longer. He still shows up, but he's kind of like the guy in Office Space who just like cleans the fish at his desk. He just has better things to do now. He's not actively resisting the job. All this good stuff's happening outside of work, and his energy just keeps improving. When he goes into headquarters, instead of his vibe being repellent, it's now magnetic. He reconnects with an old team lead he used to love working with. They design a new role for Jack on a better team, higher visibility clients. So he's back to doing what he loves to do, which is solve complex programming problems when he's not on his yoga mat. It's only 10 months later, and a couple weeks ago, I checked in with him, and this blew my mind that apparently a massive chunk of his stock vested, and now he has the financial flexibility to travel the world when he chooses, keep working on his tiny homes, rent them out, and pursue yoga teacher training. As a coach, I could not have worked out a better racket on paper for him. But because he stopped resisting and he had fun with the process, doing all that stuff was stuff he loved to do. And because he loved to do it and he had so much joy doing it, it created such a more powerful what could be than we thought possible. So that's trading fun for resistance. The second, befriending the ego, this comes up in meditation practice. So I've been lucky to work with a lot of people across the world who create a meditation habit. And creating a meditation habit, who's ever tried to do it, it's kind of painful at first because our ego has so much to say about it. And the only way to get around it is to befriend the ego and work with it. The ego is a powerful tool. It definitely has a point of diminishing returns, but it's a powerful tool. But when we befriend it, we kind of treat it like that annoying dorm room neighbor in freshman year of college. You just kind of hide the chips in the beer, you don't argue or judge, you just kind of let them pass and eventually they'll go away. So in meditation practice, it looks like sitting down, being quiet, quieting the mind. You know we suck at this, right? Oh wait, we're not supposed to be thinking. Then who am I talking to? Wait, you're listening, right? Wait, I'm not supposed to be talking. By the way, you can't stop thinking. It's just not helpful. It's just not helpful. When you're determined to quiet the mind without judgment or attachment, eventually the mind runs out of things to say. And all the ego is doing is trying to protect us from what could be, from the uncertainty. So when we lean into that with love and acceptance, like, yeah, I'll listen to it. It will fade eventually. So that's befriending the ego. And that works great on an internal level when creating a new habit. But what about dropping an old habit that just doesn't work for you anymore? Like many people, I had struggled with quitting drinking for a long time. And either because of my weak resolve or social relationships, I just was never able to kick it. And what I realized was that I was focusing too much on what I'd be leaving behind. Certain relationships, access to late night bar parties within our company, or maybe just the next party in general. I didn't want to leave any of it behind in what is. And it was all keeping me stuck in the habit. 2012, on my last day of drinking, I was pressure washing our kids' wooden swing set. We had a bunch of burly men over to help us move it across the yard. I recall being shirtless in camouflage shorts and tragically Crocs. I was inching my way down the ramp, and because my Crocs were soaked and the wash was going at full blast and I had drank more than a few beers, I slipped and fell, engulfed by my storm of bad choices, landed by my shirtless armpits on the ropes that lined the ramp. The hand still gripped the washer at full blast, while I slid the rest of the descent by my shirtless, rope-burned armpits. The burly men and my wife howled with laughter, understandably, and I just recall feeling like a complete idiot. But the flash of clarity finally came. Maybe I have better things to do and ways of doing them. Maybe I have other options. I hung up my long, distinguished drinking career for good. I made my decision once back on the ramp. And for the last 7 years and thousands of offers to drink since, my decision had already been made. But the lasting change party was just getting started. To release the habit, I needed to focus on something more powerful to move towards than some booze gremlin I was trying to outrun. And what that looked like for me was looking around at children and starting to remember how we used to party as kids with just unbridled levity and movement and fits of laughter and, floss infernos. My daughter Frankie's the flossing queen of Northeast Ohio. And I just started tuning in with that levity and that lightness. And it became such a much more gripping, basically it took what could be for me and pulled me towards it with a stronger magnetic pull than what is could hold me back. So when you get the idea that a habit is no longer serving you, start amplifying what could be. You'd be surprised how powerful that could be. In the game of change, when we win, everybody wins. Whenever we play the game, our relationships, our families, our communities are uplifted. And there's even a sweet participation award. It's called less suffering. But if we understand how the game of change is played, swapping fun for resistance, befriending the ego, moving more boldly towards what you're doing and what could be than whatever is behind you, the upgrades we seek become possible. The great spiritual teacher Paramahansa Yogananda said, "Let your example be the way to change others' lives. Reform yourself and you will reform thousands." And maybe reforming ourselves can be more fun than painful. Our brains trick us into managing the thing we're trying to change instead of doing the work of changing ourselves, like the fortune cookie told us. We need to focus less on the thing and more on our relationship to change itself. We don't need to justify what is at the expense of what could be. We need to be firm in our resolve, but gentle with ourselves. Love and laugh our way through it. Thank you.